In the cold, calculating theater of war, victory is supposed to be dictated by simple, brutal arithmetic. It is a numbers game. The deployment of superior forces, the logistical edge of having more soldiers, more ordnance, and more supplies, these factors are the bedrock upon which military strategists have built empires and shattered nations since the dawn of conflict. The equation is elegant in its cruelty: wins. But the history of human conflict is not a spreadsheet. It is an epic poem scrawled in blood and defiance. Scattered throughout the annals of time are certain individuals who did not just ignore this mathematical decree, they treated it with outright, arrogant contempt. These are the documented anomalies, the human equivalents of a singularity in the space-time of battle. They are the absolute legends who, through sheer will, uncanny skill, or staggering psychological warfare, single-handedly face down entire armies, companies, or divisions, and somehow, impossibly, came out on top. This is the chronicle of the most insane solo acts ever recorded, where the rigid geometry of the battlefield was twisted by one person who became the entire battle plan. They were not commanders, they were catalysts. They were not cogs in the war machine, they were the machine itself, proving that the human spirit, when pushed to its final, desperate extreme, can function as an exponentially superior force multiplier. Number 1. Hiroo Onoda, the Perpetual Soldier. The surrender documents for the Second World War were signed in 1945. A global ceasefire was declared, peace treaties were drafted, and the world began the arduous, uneven process of recovery. This sweeping, undeniable global fact was a memo that apparently nobody bothered to deliver convincingly to Japanese intelligence officer Hiroo Onoda. Onoda was stationed deep in the lush, humid interior of Lubang Island in the Philippines. His final unyielding directive from his superior officer, a voice of authority that had been seared into his soul, was simple, absolute, and utterly unforgiving. Stay and fight, and never surrender. He was to be the persistent, unseen thorn in the side of the enemy, maintaining a presence that confirmed the Imperial Japanese Army's eternal commitment. As the years blurred into the post-war era, Onoda and his few companions watched the sky. When aircraft dropped leaflets announcing the war's conclusion, citing peace and the emperor's capitulation, Onoda did not feel relief or confusion, he felt outraged confirmation of a massive deception. He dismissed every piece of evidence, every radio broadcast, every dropped newspaper, every message from home as sophisticated, demoralizing enemy propaganda. For the next 29 years, Onoda continued his own, meticulously maintained private war. He wasn't simply an elderly man hiding in the jungle. He was a fully operational, highly trained guerrilla unit of one after his last comrade surrendered. His existence was a masterclass in survival and operational discipline. He conducted precision raids on local farms for rice and cattle, meticulously maintained his rifle, and, most bizarrely, continued to diligently gather intelligence for a global empire that had ceased to exist 3 decades prior. His conflict became less about national loyalty and more about a one-man war against the concept of calendars, history, and reality itself. The anomaly only ended in 1974. A point in time when the moon had been walked upon and the world had forgotten his war. A young Japanese traveler found him, leading to the complex, delicate arrangement where his former commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, now a humble bookseller, was flown in to personally and officially relieve him of duty. Only upon hearing the voice of the authority that had given the original order did Onoda finally, formally, lay down his rifle. Number 2. Juje Liang, the vibe check victory. The conventional wisdom in military circles dictates that an army of 150,000 men approaching a fortress defended by only a handful of troops calls for a siege, a desperate last stand, or a swift, strategic retreat. In the era of the Three Kingdoms in China, military strategy was an intricate, often brutal dance of cunning and force. Yet Zhuge Liang, the legendary strategist of the Shu Han Kingdom, found himself in exactly this impossible predicament at Jieting. Instead of preparing for the hopeless crunch of battle, instead of ordering his few terrified soldiers to man the ramparts for a meaningless sacrifice, Zhuge Liang's mind began to spin a web of psychological warfare so intricate, so brazen, that it defied every rule of engagement. He did the absolute most paradoxical thing anyone could expect. He ordered the gates of the fortress to be thrown wide open. The sight that greeted the immense approaching army of the Wei Kingdom was not a barricade of spears, but a serene, almost domesticated scene. He placed a few civilian attendants, chosen for their steady nerves, to calmly sweep the entrance to the fortress as if expecting honored guests. Zhuge Liang himself performed the ultimate act of theatrical confidence. Clad in his scholar's robes, he ascended to the highest point of the main gate tower. There, under the vast, intimidating shadow of the enemy host, he sat down, drew his guqin, a seven-stringed zither, often mistakenly called a lute in translation, and began to casually play his music. The melody was not mournful or aggressive. It was calm, contemplative, and utterly assured. The enemy commander, General Sima Yi, a military genius in his own right, arrived and saw this bizarre spectacle. His mind, trained in the dark arts of ambush and feint, immediately began to churn. Why the open gates? Why the sweeping? Why the music? The sheer, unadulterated confidence displayed by Zhuge Liang, a man known for his meticulous cunning, was so unnerving, so deeply suspicious that Sima Yi could only conclude one thing: the fortress must be concealing a massive, deadly ambush right behind the gates. This could only be a trap designed to lure them into a killing ground. The risk was simply too great. Sima Yi, paralyzed by doubt born from his opponent's flawless composure, made the fateful decision. He ordered a full, immediate retreat. Zhuge Liang had defeated an entire, overwhelmingly superior army, not with the cold steel of swords or the rain of arrows, but with an impeccable display of nerve. A legendary vibe check that proved the mind is the sharpest weapon of all.
Number 3. Tommy McPherson, the kilted con man. The sheer audacity required to defeat an army single-handedly is one thing. To convince them to surrender is another entirely. But British Commando Tommy McPherson was a man whose confidence operated on an entirely different plane of reality, one where sheer nerve trumped military logistics. McPherson, an officer of the elite Lovat Scouts, was not operating under ideal conditions. He had recently escaped a prisoner of war camp in Italy and was deep behind enemy lines in Tuscany, a geographical point of extreme peril. His uniform was replaced by the highly distinctive, utterly anachronistic sight of a Scottish kilt. His arsenal consisted of a single pistol, possibly empty, and the full, unblinking power of his own audacity. His path intersected with the command car of the formidable 23,000-strong German Das Reich Division, a battle-hardened and heavily armored unit. McPherson did not hide or retreat. He approached the vehicle with the confidence of a general overseeing a massive operation. He came face to face with the German general and launched into the most audacious, spectacular bluff in military history. Speaking with a tone of urgent, pitying authority, he informed the general that the division was completely surrounded by a massive, unseen Allied force. The German position, he declared, was hopeless. He asserted that if they did not surrender immediately, if they forced him to give the signal, he would call in a devastating, pre-sighted artillery bombardment that would wipe out the entire division in minutes. The truth was a stark, almost comical contrast to the general's panic. There was no Allied force. There was no artillery battery on standby. There was just Tommy, one highly stressed, kilted Scottish officer with a masterful command of theater and threat. The German general, utterly convinced by the immaculate performance and the sheer, chilling gravity of McPherson's bearing, saw only the inevitability of annihilation. He made the decision that saved thousands of lives and gifted the Allies an impossible victory. He surrendered his entire division, all its tanks, its heavy equipment, and its thousands of men to the one man who had merely used his words as the most potent weapon. Number 4. Leo Major, the one-eyed liberator. In the final, brutal throes of the liberation of the Netherlands, the Canadian forces were engaged in the tedious, costly house-to-house fighting necessary to push the remnants of the German Wehrmacht out of the country. Leo Major, a Canadian soldier whose life was already the stuff of legend, he had lost an eye in an explosion, giving him a characteristic pirate-like scowl, was known for his fearless reputation and an almost zero patience for the continuing German occupation. The mission was simple reconnaissance. Major and his close friend and fellow scout, Sergeant Willie Arsenal, were sent to scout the city of Zwolle. The night began with the quiet tension of infiltration, but it quickly turned into a tragedy. Arsenal was killed by a sudden burst of German fire. The death of his comrade triggered something primal and uncontrollable within him, a state that could only be described as controlled, weaponized rage. The mission was abandoned. The strategy was discarded. Major decided in that moment that the liberation of the entire city of Zwolle would not wait for his regiment. He was going to liberate the entire city by himself that very night. Armed with a machine gun and a canvas bag full of high-explosive grenades, Major began his personalized one-man assault. For hours he moved through the cobblestone streets like a demon loosed from the chaos of battle. He adopted a brilliantly chaotic tactical plan. He would fire the machine gun from one position, empty the magazine into a target, toss a couple of grenades at a nearby building, and then immediately run to a completely different location, often several streets away, and repeat the process. The resulting cacophony of small arms fire and rolling explosions gave the impression of a full-scale coordinated Canadian assault. The German garrison, fatigued, demoralized, and convinced they were about to be overrun by a much larger, unseen force, descended into absolute panic. To further sow chaos, Major located the German headquarters, disabled a command car, and even managed to capture the German staff officer. He drove the German officer around in the captured vehicle for hours, firing sporadically to maintain the illusion of ongoing battle, before releasing him with a message. "Tell your men to leave before the Canadians arrive." By the time the sun rose, the Germans had broken and fled in terror. Leo Major had single-handedly captured a city of 50,000 people, securing its surrender to an army that had not yet crossed its municipal border. Number 5. Guy Gabaldon, the Pied Piper of Saipan. The battle for Saipan in 1944 was a scene of unparalleled brutality. The Japanese command had instilled a rigid culture. Surrender was not a concept to be entertained, and every soldier was expected to fight to the last breath. The landscape was a deadly maze of heavily defended caves, bunkers, and ridgelines. Enter U.S. Marine Private Guy Gabaldon. Unlike many of his comrades, Gabaldon had an unusual background. He had grown up in the Japanese-American community of East Los Angeles, where he had lived with a Japanese-American family and had become fluent in the language. He possessed a unique cultural bridge that no other soldier could match. While the rest of the Marines were preparing for the gruesome, inch-by-inch work of clearing the defenses with flamethrowers and high explosives, Gabaldon was proposing a method that was considered madness. He would approach the heavily defended caves and bunkers alone, unarmed, and simply start talking. It was an incredibly dangerous gamble. He would tell the soldiers inside, often terrified, malnourished, and indoctrinated with the fear of American torture, that the battle was irrevocably lost, that they would not be harmed, and he offered them a dignified way out of a meaningless death. His genuine, non-threatening approach, delivered in their own language, pierced the veil of propaganda and fear. The effect was instantaneous and staggering. In one day alone, he convinced over 800 soldiers to walk out of their positions and surrender. His total tally remains one of the most remarkable feats of the Pacific War. He single-handedly facilitated the capture of over 1,000 enemy combatants and civilians, a figure that exceeded the number of his own Marine regiment. He earned the famous nickname, the Pied Piper of Saipan, proving unequivocally that sometimes, amidst the thunder of artillery, the quiet, persistent power of words and empathy can indeed be mightier than the sword. It was a one-man peace mission that achieved a military objective through an act of profound personal courage.
Number 6. Benkai, the standing death at the bridge. In the tumultuous period of 12th century Japan, filled with clan warfare and the rise of the samurai, tales of physical prowess and fierce loyalty became legend. The warrior monk Saito Musashibo Benkai, or simply Benkai, was a giant even by the standards of his time, a figure of intimidating bulk and impossible strength, famed for possessing an arsenal of 7 massive weapons. But his lasting legend is built on a single unwavering oath of loyalty to his lord, Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Their tale culminates at the Koromogawa River, where they were finally quartered by the forces of the rival Fujiwara clan. To allow his master to escape, Benkai took his position on the narrow bridge spanning the river. He was the only thing standing between Yoshitsune and the advancing army. Benkai didn't just stand. He became a physical, immovable wall of muscle and steel. According to the epics, he fought with a terrifying superhuman ferocity, single-handedly battling the entire advancing army, allegedly cutting down over 300 soldiers who attempted to cross. The enemy soldiers, unable to breach the bridge and get past this absolute indomitable unit, eventually realized the futility of close-quarters combat. They stayed back and turned the great warrior monk into a human pincushion with a storm of arrows loosed from a safe distance. The truly incredible, chilling part of the story comes after the deadly rain subsided. Even after being struck by dozens upon dozens of arrows, Benkai did not fall. He remained standing perfectly upright on the bridge, his immense body bristling with shafts, his hand still gripping his massive naginata. He had died, yet he was still guarding the bridge. The enemy soldiers, struck by the terrifying finality of his posture and the sheer conviction of his final act, were so afraid to cross that they hesitated for long minutes, convinced he was still alive and waiting. Only when a few brave souls approached cautiously did they realize he was no longer moving. Benkai had literally held the line, defying death itself until his loyalty was fulfilled. Number 7. Blackbeard, Edward Teach. The apotheosis of rage. The name Blackbeard, Edward Teach, is synonymous with the golden age of piracy,
a figure who deliberately cultivated a fearsome reputation, braiding fuses into his massive beard and lighting them before battle to appear as a demon wreathed in smoke and fire. But his final, violent act confirmed that his reputation was earned in blood, not just theatrical smoke. In 1718, he was finally tracked down and ambushed by the British Royal Navy sloop HMS Pearl, commanded by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. Blackbeard's ship, the Adventure, was boarded and the pirate found himself in a close-quarters fight for his life against a squad of trained, disciplined sailors. The accounts of those who survived the maelstrom paint a picture of a man less human and more elemental force. Blackbeard fought with the terrifying, desperate fury of a cornered animal. He absorbed an insane, impossible amount of damage, refusing to yield to overwhelming injury. He was reportedly shot 5 times by pistol and musket fire and received over 20 severe sword wounds, a catalogue of mortal injury that should have felled any man instantly. In his final duel, he engaged Lieutenant Maynard. Blackbeard's own cutlass broke mid-fight, but he didn't falter. He simply reached for a pistol and kept fighting until another sailor, realizing the pirate would not fall, nearly severed his head from behind. Blackbeard was not a man who died. He was a walking, screaming, unstoppable testament to the power of pure, indomitable rage, a physical embodiment of defiance. He refused to cease fighting until it was physically impossible for his body to continue functioning, ensuring his legend would forever be known as the pirate who had to be killed 3 times over before he finally hit the deck.
Number 8. Simo Häyhä, the Ghost in the Snow, the White Death. The Winter War of 1939 to 1940 was a brutal, asymmetric conflict between the Soviet Union and tiny Finland. The vast, mechanized might of the Red Army was confronted by a small, highly determined Finnish force that used the sub-zero temperatures and thick forests as their ultimate defense. In the frozen landscape, the Soviets quickly acquired a boogeyman, a silent, invisible assassin they dubbed the White Death. His real name was Simo Häyhä, an unassuming Finnish farmer who became the deadliest sniper in military history. The conditions of his hunt were unimaginable. The Finnish forests were a wasteland of snow and ice with temperatures regularly dropping to an Arctic -40°C. Dressed in his white camouflage, Häyhä hunted Soviet soldiers, often sustaining himself on only a small amount of food and water over long days. What makes his story truly insane is his method. He performed this deadly work entirely without a telescopic scope. He insisted on using only his rifle's iron sights. His reasoning was simple and lethal. A scope could fog up in the extreme cold, or, worse, its glass could glint in the sun, instantly revealing his position to a keen-eyed enemy. He also packed snow tightly in front of his firing position to prevent the rifle's muzzle blast from disturbing the ground, eliminating his location's telltale signature. In the span of just 100 days of combat, Häyhä recorded over 500 confirmed kills, the highest tally in any major war. He was a silent, patient ghost in the snow, an operational defensive line of one that the Soviets considered a threat so significant they sent entire task forces, including counter-snipers and artillery teams, with the sole purpose of eliminating him. All of them failed miserably. Häyhä was eventually wounded by an explosive bullet that shattered his jaw, but he survived and recovered, retiring as a living, breathing legend who redefined the limits of individual effectiveness in battle. Number 9. Charles Commando Kelly, the Walking Armory. The Medal of Honor is the highest award for valor in the United States military, and the citation for Sergeant Charles Commando Kelly reads less like a military record and more like the script for an action movie's climactic scene.
His one-man stand occurred during fierce fighting in Italy in 1944. Kelly's small position was placed under relentless, heavy attack. The Germans, seeking to overrun the post, hammered it with a constant barrage of fire and relentless infantry assaults. As the battle raged, Kelly's primary defense system began to fail. His ammunition was dwindling to nearly nothing. Most soldiers in this situation would consider retreat the only viable option. Kelly, however, did not retreat. Instead, he initiated a lethal, desperate scavenger hunt. For 5 straight, agonizing hours, under continuous, heavy fire, Kelly crawled from position to position, grabbing any weapon he could find that still had a round left in it. Abandoned rifles, bars, Browning automatic rifles, Tommy guns, and, most creatively, 60mm mortar rounds, which he used as improvised, devastatingly effective grenades. The Germans kept coming, throwing everything they had at the position, and Kelly kept finding new, ferocious ways to kill them. He wasn't simply holding a position on the map, he had transformed into the entire defense system. He became a single, furious soldier who refused to let the enemy pass, morphing into a walking, shooting armory, fueled by nothing but adrenaline and pure, bloody defiance. When the relief forces finally reached him, they found the ground littered with enemy dead, and Charles Kelly, exhausted but undefeated, standing among his makeshift collection of weaponry.
Number 10. Lachman Gurung, the one-handed Gurkha. The Gurkhas of Nepal are legendary, fearsome soldiers, famed for their courage, their commitment, and their iconic kukri knife. The story of rifleman Lachman Gurung during the fighting in Burma in World War II shows why their reputation is absolutely deserved. Gurung was manning a forward trench, isolated and alone, when his position was swarmed by over 200 Japanese soldiers. The first stage of the attack was a rain of grenades. Gurung, with unnatural calm, tossed the first 2 enemy grenades back before they could detonate in his trench. The third grenade, however, was thrown too quickly and landed too close. It exploded immediately, utterly blowing off his right hand and simultaneously inflicting horrific, severe wounds to his face, chest, and right leg. For any normal human being, this is not just the end of the fight, it is the end of consciousness. For Gurung, it was merely a serious inconvenience. The pain was ignored, the blood loss relegated to a background issue. He calmly and deliberately switched his rifle to his left hand, the hand that was still whole, and for the next 4 hours, he single-handedly fought off wave after wave of relentless Japanese attacks. He maintained an impossible rate of fire, his left hand operating the weapon with furious precision. When the full fury of the assault finally subsided and the position was relieved, 31 Japanese soldiers lay dead in front of his trench. Lachman Gurung had essentially delivered a final bloody message to the enemy. You took my hand, so I'm just going to have to kill you all with the other one. For this incredible, superhuman display of tenacity, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. These were the anomalies, the individuals who became a temporary force of nature. But a list of 10 is just a starting point. We know every history buff watching has that one story they're furious we didn't include. So, who is the single most legendary one-man army we criminally failed to mention? Don't just drop a name. Make your case in the comments and prove why they belong here. The debate starts now. And while you're crafting your argument, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of impossible human endurance. See you in the comments.